When we look at these literary ages and literary periods, and when we look at these poets and authors, sometimes it's very difficult to place them exactly, whether they belong to this period or to that period, because no age or period, suddenly shifts. The movement is gradual. And so some of these writers, they belong to maybe an earlier period and they have written in the next period too. So it is difficult to place them and say that such and such a writer belonged to such and such an age. It's not possible in all cases. And this is only because the periods shift gradually, the movement is gradually. Suppose we look at the neoclassical age. And after the neoclassical age, if you look directly at what you call the Romantic revival, it's not as if, the neoclassical age just faded out and the Romantic age stepped in. It was not that. Samuel Johnson was a towering figure of what we know as the age of Johnson, and that age of Johnson is also a part of this Augustan period. And Johnson was such a towering figure, and he was against the Romantic tendencies. He was in favor of the classical tendencies, and so he alone, as a literary figure, is responsible for holding back the coming of the Romantic age. He was able to do that. He was able to push the Romantic age from actually putting in an appearance for at least 20 years. But the neoclassical tendencies, the favor of let's say the heroic couplet and things like that, too much of reasoning, too much of the intellectual faculty, all these things were beginning to wear off, and people were looking for other things. There has been a period in history which we could call the age of revolutions. So you have the French Revolution, 1789. Even before that, you had the American Revolution, 1776. And things were changing so rapidly in the political, economic, and social areas that slowly life was beginning to take on a new shape. Now writers and poets started looking to nature as a savior. And so there was a renewed interest in nature. Nature was considered as herself a subject, an entire subject in herself. And nature was a subject which could be examined. And so there was a renewed interest in nature, although these tendencies did not really appear very prominently for quite a few years. But the change was beginning to show up, and this period of change from the Augustan to what we will know as the Romantic Revival, that change and that period when this will go and that will come. That is what is known as the age of transition or the pre-Romantic period. The age of transition or the pre-Romantic period. You will have poets like James Thomson, who wrote The Seasons. Then Thomas Gray and William Collins, who will write odes. A new kind of poetry, and what is known as the graveyard poets. They were disillusioned with life, and whatever was happening in the world around them was depressing, and it was causing a lot of uneasiness in the minds of these poets who could not come to terms with whatever was the reality outside. And so they became melancholic and even depressive. William Collins was a wonderful poet, but he hardly wrote 1500 lines in all, which is a very, very small output. He was a very great lyric poet, but owing to his bouts of depression, he hardly ever wrote. So he was hardly able to write about 1500 lines. But you have some beautiful poems that he has written. He has written the Ode to Evening, Ode to Simplicity. They are beautiful pieces. So also Thomas Gray. And as a part of this graveyard poetry, you have Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard, musing over death, and the setting is a graveyard or a ruin or some such place. So these poets, whether it is James Thomson who wrote about nature, whether it is William Collins, Thomas Gray who wrote beautiful odes, and you have William Cooper and William Blake. William Blake is the earliest of the Romantics, but you could very well group him under the pre-Romantics because his whatever he has written and his period is not wholly romantic either. So he belongs to part of the pre-Romantic tradition, and of course he began the Romantic tradition too. And Blake has written the songs of innocence, the songs of experience, and you have a lot of engravings that he has done. And all this is now going to set the stage for the coming of Romanticism. Also, in this period, you have what is known as Gothic literature. Horace Walpole wrote The Castle of Otranto. The Castle of Otranto, Walpole wrote this. Later in the Romantic period, Anne Radcliffe will become well known for Gothic literature. So, this Castle of Otranto is a frightening kind of text. This is Gothic literature. Frightening, evil, castles, haunted houses, and things like that. When we speak of literature, we speak in terms of form and content. Form and content. If you look at form, you could call it the manner of writing, the style. And if you look at the content, you could speak of it as matter, the subject matter on which something is written. If you look at the Elizabethan age, you will find that both the matter and the manner, both were simple in the Elizabethan age. So the form and content were both simple. But a change occurred, the metaphysical period came, and you found that, the content or the matter remained simple, but the manner, that became complicated. That is why metaphysical poetry is a little difficult to understand. They have all those conceits and all that. So in the metaphysical period, one is going to remain simple and the other is going to get elevated. So matter will remain simple as it was in the Elizabethan age, and manner will get elevated. The language will become tough, there will be conceits, it will be an exercise to your brain. All that will happen in the metaphysical, when you read metaphysical poetry. Then when you come to the neoclassical period or the Augustan age, you find that both have become very difficult. The matter has also gone up. Now they are not going to write about simple things like nature and love. They will all pertain to the intellect. So the matter will also get elevated and the manner will also get elevated. Pope's essay on criticism, it is not like any of the Elizabethan poetry. Elizabethan poetry, love lyrics, all those things are left behind. Poetry had become slightly more complicated. When you come across poems by John Donne, etc., there is a fusion of the head and the heart, the intellect and the emotion. But it is different from Elizabethan poetry, which was very simple to follow, very simple theme, very simple language. So metaphysical poetry became different. And when you come to the Augustan period, both are going to be very difficult to understand. And this is going to be the Augustan poetry. Heroic couplets will be used and the subject matter will be tough, the language will be tough, there'll be personifications and things. Now from this peak, there is again going to be a downslide and we come to what is known as the age of transition or the pre-romantic poetry. Now again, one thing will remain elevated and one will become simple. So the pre-romantic poets like Collins, Gray, etc., they chose themes from nature. They chose themes from nature. So the subject matter became simple and the manner of treatment, the language, the style remained complicated as it was in the neoclassical period. And from here, the movement will be towards the Romantic Revival. It is known as the Romantic Revival because by the time the Romantic period comes, you will find that the tendencies in literature are very similar to the tendencies in Elizabethan literature. Simple matter and simple manner. In the pre-romantic age or the age of transition, you get to hear, God made the country, man made the town. So now there is going to be a movement towards nature. And all the tendencies of the pre-romantic period will get intensified They will get intensified in the romantic period which will follow.